Oh, hi, everyone. It's Naomi Wolf. And as I promised on X, I am here to, respond to the very strong reaction on social media to a post I made earlier. Sorry, the bed is messy. I didn't quite prepare adequately, but you'll forgive me. I'll just reorient it like that. Um, that's not so good. There we go. I posted on X earlier today that I was going to stop talking about campaign advice to the opposition, which I'd been doing, meaning to both the Trump campaign and to the RFK Jr. campaign, because of the frustrating blowback and lack of momentum, basically. And a lot of people said, don't do that. Keep posting, keep using your experience from two successful presidential campaigns on which I was a campaign consultant. Well, 1.5 successful presidential campaigns. There was President Clinton's reelection campaign in 1996, and I was an informal advisor to Dick Morris, who was the chief advisor to the campaign. And then again in 2000, I was formally an advisor to Gore 2000. I was an advisor to Vice President Gore, and specifically on messaging about women's issues. And yes, it was a long time ago, but some things like the DNC playbook really don't change that much. And those of you who follow my work, may know that I consider myself at this point a walkaway, meaning that I walked away from the Democratic Party. I don't recognize this Democratic Party. They've become entirely unlike the liberal, grassroots-oriented, social justice-oriented, free speech-oriented party of my youth, to which I initially gave my allegiance. And I actually feel, as you know, if you follow me, that this administration, the Biden-Harris administration, is beyond treasonous. I mean, like, just to recap, since I last spoke to you live, beyond treasonous, right? Let me just set the stage a little before I launch in. I'm going to read you my essay, How Not to Run Against Vice President Harris. I did a bit of a riff about this theme last week on video, and then I wrote this formal essay while I was away on vacation last week. But I haven't read this formal essay and live and taken your questions. And I do feel like I always want to be transparent and accountable to my audience, to all of you amazing people who care about what I have to say. So I wanted to take this opportunity to read it to you and literally take your questions live. And I can do that not just on StreamYard, where I seem to be getting your comments, but also I'll keep X open. So those of you who are, among the 450,000 people who follow me on X, thank you very much for doing that. Just, write to me, and I'll read right there on X, below this live stream, and I will respond after I'm done reading you this essay. But just before I launch in, I want to set the stage a little bit since I last spoke with you. Where is President Biden? Like, we've been conditioned in just 2 weeks since he had his medical emergency shortly after the assassination attempt against President Trump in Butler, Pennsylvania. My reasoning about this. I think that there was some involvement with the Biden family, possibly, allegedly, don't sue me, that in setting a stage, I'm not going to say in, telling anyone to assassinate anyone, but creating an environment in which an assassination attempt could be allowed to unfold, right? I think it's pretty clear that assassination attempt was allowed to happen in various ways. That's all the evidence is mounting up in that direction. And I've said in earlier essays that in a White House, no one will say, the deniability is a very big deal. No one will say, just take away Secret Service from President Trump. but there will be a an allowances made in a certain direction without anything on paper, anything directive, such that it becomes pretty clear what the principal wants or what his family wants or what his senior advisors want. And then that kind of has a ripple effect. And it's much more like that famous line, will no one rid me of this meddlesome priest, uh, that led to the assassination of a cleric in England. And I'm having a moment in which I don't recall the name of the cleric, but you all, Thomas à Becket, I believe. So that being said, and this is a recap, where we are now, and it's kind of incredible that in the United States of America in 2024, I'm recapping events that are like the least credible, pulp fiction that you could ever imagine. But I do believe, without pointing any specific fingers, that there was something to cover up, because whoever allowed the assassination attempt to take place didn't expect Trump to survive it. They thought no one would be asking questions, or that they'd be more in control of the situation. And then again, to recap, there was a couple of maybe a week of what was clearly a struggle between two competing coups, right? And those of you who follow me, forgive me, I'm recapping a bit, but there was the Hunter family trying to stay in power, and the sort of Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, DNC, Obama faction, Mrs. Clinton faction, at odds with them, and basically saying, step aside, step aside, step aside. And Nancy Pelosi essentially, confirmed that she was trying to get President Biden to step aside. At around this time, there was a medical emergency. Laura Loomer broke this story. I really want to credit her. She broke it early. She had sources on the ground in Las Vegas saying that the president had been prepared to be taken to an ER following a medical emergency. She was called a conspiracy theorist. She was attacked. It turns out to be true. The Wall Street Journal has, yesterday or the day before, managed to FOIA really fascinating records of the Las Vegas police very calmly and professionally preparing to transport POTUS, the word they used, to an emergency facility in Las Vegas. So that's come to like 2 weeks later. And I just want to, remind everyone that this is, I'm sorry, this is beeping. I'm going to unplug it and see if that's better. This is a giant, it is now confirmed that President Biden had some kind of dramatic emergency, medical emergency that led to it's a much bigger deal than, the medical emergency that was kind of gently leaked to soft launch before the Wall Street Journal successfully FOIA'd and released these audio clips. Whole streets in Las Vegas were blocked by the police to allow the motorcade of the president to speed to the emergency room. It's not clear from the audio exactly what happened, if they went to the emergency room, but literally chunks of the city of Las Vegas were immobilized by the police because the President of the United States was having a medical emergency, thoroughly confirmed in these audio records obtained by the Wall Street Journal. So I just want to pause and say, that is a big deal. That is a big deal. It's a big deal to billions of people around the world that the President of the United States of America was so badly incapacitated that the city of Las Vegas was partly immobilized to allow him to be sped to an emergency facility. Okay. It's a big deal. It's a big deal for our national security. It's a big deal for the chain of command. It's a big deal for our defense forces. It's a big deal for our intelligence community. It's a big deal for the citizens who elected him, ostensibly, who have a right to know always if this is in our Constitution, if our president is incapacitated. It is our right to know they work for us. And having been a White House spouse in the Clinton era. My then husband was a speechwriter for President Clinton, a special advisor to the president. I watched these events, as a spouse, up close for years, how they unfold. And a president doesn't just kind of, oh, I'm not feeling well, I'm going to hop off Air Force One and take an Uber to the emergency room. That's not what happens. Okay. And it's kind of incredible that this whole episode has been so memory hold by a massive media, propaganda campaign launched to kind of move us right along. Don't look there. That's a conspiracy theory, right? That we have to kind of be forced to, by me, I hope, to reflect on this. There is a gigantic protocol if a president is incapacitated. Gigantic. Okay. There are security plans. There's a chain of command. I mean, remember when Reagan was, well, you're probably a lot of you too young, when Reagan was shot in 1981. I may have the date wrong. It's been a long day. But when President Reagan was shot by a would-be assassin, John Hinckley, there was a scramble, and people claim, his advisors claimed to be in charge, and there was kind of a frenzy, like who's in charge of America until the president's health is stabilized. Well, we don't know if President Biden was unconscious. We don't know if he had a stroke or a heart attack. And I'm just going to say it. We don't know if he passed away. And I really hope that I don't get assassinated now. But, this is our country at stake. We don't know. And I'll get to that in a minute. So it's not trivial, right? When, that tragic day when John F. Kennedy was assassinated, there was an immediate protocol that kicked in. Remember, where Lyndon Baines Johnson stepped right in and reassured the country. And this was before people knew that John F. Kennedy had passed away. They just knew that he had been shot. Well, this protocol kicked in. Did it kick in here? Did the vice president step forward with the national security advisor and say, we've got it. There's an announcement. President Biden has had a medical emergency. Per the Constitution, I'm now acting president. Like, that's what's supposed to happen. Right. And there's a whole chain of command. And, where's the football, right? There's a chain of command. There's a protocol, meaning the nuclear football, right? In that moment, when the police in Las Vegas, the dispatchers in Las Vegas, knew that the president was injured or ill or unconscious or incapacitated in some way, having a medical emergency, and the rest of America didn't know, right? Also think about how many people have been forced to sign an NDA or however, like, how did this not come out, right? It's a big public event. I mean, you can hear on these recordings that dozens of people in Las Vegas, very professionally were handling the incredibly complex logistics to get President Biden to the hospital. Well, if they knew, and people on Air Force One knew, then people in the White House knew, people in the Pentagon knew, right? People in the State Department knew. I mean, there would be multiple layers of people in the kind of regime and allied agencies who would have had to know that the president was incapacitated or having a medical emergency, including his doctor, by the way. And they are supposed to kick in the protocol. They're not supposed to just let it lie and let us go about our business completely in the dark. That is not how it happens legally. Okay. So then President Biden had COVID. All right, maybe he did. Maybe he's still alive. Maybe he just bumped his head. They wanted to check it. Who knows? We don't know. We're supposed to be told, right? I mean, President Reagan didn't just disappear and, pardon me, hide the fact that he'd been shot. President Trump didn't disappear and hide the fact that he'd been, injured near his head. But he's not even a sitting president. The sitting president is supposed to inform the people. I mean, it was a scandal when President Wilson had a stroke, and his wife ran the country, unbeknownst to the country, at the start of the 20th century. This was an absolute scandal. She ran the country for 2 years, hiding the fact that President Wilson was incapacitated. So, okay, Biden had had COVID, pardon me. Then for a week, we didn't hear from him or see him, which is completely, I can't stress enough, totally irregular. Totally irregular, because I will tell you, from having worked around a White House and been a White House spouse and been a consultant to presidential campaigns, there is always a photographer. Like, everything that happens in the White House, everything that happens to the president and the vice president, everywhere they go, every minute of the day is made record of. There is a photographer. There are videographers. They are not outside photographers and videographers. They are White House staff photographers and videographers. There is a record of everything. You can't disappear if you're the president. Why? Because you don't belong to yourself. You legally belong. Your role, your activity, what you're doing, your schedule belongs to the people of the United States of America. So it's thoroughly, bypassing chains of laws and legality around transparency to just take off for a week, hang out in, Delaware, and be ill with no message to the people, no still photographs of him sitting up in a Reagan-esque way with a quilt over his knees, having a cup of tea, recovering, no greeting. Like, the standard thing with a president when there's been a scare like that is the president, as President Trump did sensibly and according to protocol, they're supposed to issue a video saying, here I am, I have COVID, everything's under control, right? Or here I am, I fell in Las Vegas, but everything's under control. None of that happened, right? It was just these opaque bulletins, and his schedule clear, schedule clear, schedule clear, schedule clear. Then there was this weird call to Vice President Harris saying, you go girl, this strange letter resigning from the re-election campaign. The transfer of the campaign, which I've told you is totally illegal. You can't transfer a campaign and its money to another candidate. That's thoroughly against FEC law, but that started to happen. And then an address to the nation about the resignation from running for re-election allegedly by President Biden, in which I will tell you, AI could have thoroughly done that. I'm not saying it did. I'm not an AI specialist. I haven't analyzed it, but I have been around and been part of innumerable speeches by presidents and vice presidents, the creation of them. And that speech was not a resignation speech. That speech was a patched together mashup of campaign sound bites. It wasn't a resignation speech. There was a sentence or two at the end saying, okay, so therefore I'm resigning. But every other phrase in that speech was from other campaign events or White House events. It was boilerplate that could be easily patched together with audio, as audio specialists have said. There were other weird things about it, like it didn't happen in real time. There were no questions. But the main thing I want to say is there have been no questions. President Biden, since his medical emergency in Las Vegas, hasn't shown up in person to respond live to reporters. To my knowledge, I may have missed something, but I follow this closely. He's been glimpsed from afar coming out of the Rose Garden after giving this alleged resignation speech. Much taller, right? I've written about that on social media. Well balanced on his legs, like a dancer or an athlete. Heavier set, more muscle mass. More expressive, kind of a, good looking old gentleman, as opposed to the, really tragic, very frail, very, very debilitated man with, according to Dr. Kelly Victory, Parkinson's. And again, just to take a moment, I interviewed Dr. Kelly Victory, and she has diagnosed Parkinson's since spring of 2020 in President Biden. Well, if that's the case, and she made a very compelling case for it, and a beloved relative of mine had Parkinson's, and it was a very long, slow, miserable, painful, debilitating decline, right? Well, if indeed he has Parkinson's, Biden has Parkinson's, if he's still with us, right? Looking back at his handlers putting him at the top of the steep steps on Air Force One over and over, people with Parkinson's cannot walk safely by themselves over time. I mean, my beloved relative was using a walker pretty early on because it affects their balance and the way their feet hit the ground, essentially. They've been abusing this poor man for a couple of years, clearly, if indeed he has Parkinson's. He could have fallen to his death at any time when he descended or ascended those steps. And if he has Parkinson's or had Parkinson's, wherever he is, it's especially cruel to think of all those memes of him trying to ascend the steps of Air Force One and falling, or being put on a bicycle and falling. I mean, my God, if that is the case, and I'm not a medical doctor, but Dr. Victory made a very compelling case for this diagnosis. He's been badly abused by his family and by Vice President Harris and by his chief of staff, right? But certainly the American people have been abused worst of all because there was no announcement that he had Parkinson's. Okay. So, and think about how vulnerable we've been and what's happened to our country in the last 2 or 3 years, if indeed our president had this very, very cognitively and physically debilitating neurological degenerative disease. So now, fast forward, we see glimpses of Biden, always shot from afar. They just released another one of this incredibly elongated, gained 6 inches in length and height, Biden at the beach in Delaware. And as I ask you to compare the same lounge chair some weeks ago, Biden's legs did not extend that far past the lounge chair. And this man, who's being represented as Biden, has gigantic feet. None of that accords with the physicality of Biden pre-Las Vegas medical emergency. So I guess the other thing I would say, there was a glimpse of him from afar in a supermarket, coming out of a supermarket, and there was a glimpse of him from very far away near a plane and allowed to wander onto the plane. All right. I guess what I'm trying to say is, knowing the stagecraft that goes into campaign events and White House events, it's very, very, very deliberate to keep the press and cameras hundreds of feet away, right? Extremely deliberate. And also very stagey, right? Like if one camera is hundreds of feet away, knowing the modern world, there should be tens or hundreds of cameras hundreds of feet away, but that's not what we're getting. We're only getting one clip, right, released by the White House. Or otherwise no provenance. And the other thing is, the distances are so remote that you really can't see, who it is or what's going on. And this Biden, who again is so much healthier and more poised and more polished, better balanced on his feet, really isn't coming forward and answering questions. He's shouting things from far away. So this is not working. So I'm going to read it from the screen. So I guess what I really want to say is, we have no evidence. And by the way, history is full of examples like this, like kings and queens in Europe. Their deaths are often concealed or obscured, or their incapacities. I'm not saying President Biden's dead. I have no knowledge of that. God forbid, may he rest in peace if that's the case. But it's very common in history for non-democracies to conceal the incapacity of their leaders, right? And to go to great lengths to hide them if they're incapacitated or have passed away, partly to avoid struggles over succession. That's the common thing. Very often in the history of Britain, for instance, a king or queen would die or be very, very ill, and the fact of that would be hidden until the succession is established, or whatever conflict around the succession has been quelled or put down, or the people trying to seize the throne have been imprisoned. I mean, the dramas in the Elizabethan era really describe this, and also the Glorious Revolution has some kind of skullduggery around succession. So that's not supposed to happen in a democracy, right? You're supposed to be told right up front, the president sadly isn't is incapacitated, in which case there's a constitutional procedure to replace him or her. And if, God forbid, he's passed away, Mrs. Harris becomes the president. And there's a whole shifting down the chain of command after that. All right. So let me now go to the campaign, and thank you for letting me summarize. I know I've been going on at length, but so much is happening. I just want to set the stage. We don't know, President Biden hasn't answered questions in real time. I can't say that enough, because as American citizens, you're entitled to have your president show up and answer questions in real time. So we really don't know who's running the United States of America. And I just want you to note that, I'm talking about it. A handful of other people are talking about it, the vulnerability that besets us when it's not clear who's running the United States of America. It could be good people. It could be bad people. It could be a foreign country. It could be Iran. It could be China, right? It could be Klaus Schwab. We don't know. It could be Hunter Biden. It could be Hunter Biden's girlfriends, right? Or his drug dealer. Like, we don't know. Very dangerous situation. But we're being lulled into, oh, look over there. It's now all about Kamala Harris, shiny object, look over there, look over there. And the metaphor for this is that Time or Newsweek cover that showed Biden's body leaving the frame and Mrs. Harris entering the frame, right? We're being encouraged to kind of not even think about President Biden at all, as if he's not the president anymore, as if that's normal. Well, it's not normal. And the reason we shouldn't be lulled into just like forgetting about President Biden is that we don't have another president. He's still the president, right? And if he's alive. And so what this means is our enemies certainly have noticed this. And all of the instability you see, all the saber rattling, Iran threatening Israel, and China making aggressive moves, and the threats against the petrodollar, everything that's happening around the world is happening because no one knows who's running the United States of America. Okay? No one knows. Our enemies know that no one knows. So if there's a time to make things worse for the United States of America, now is the time. We are not safe because they have not produced our president and had him answer questions. That is not safe. Okay, I hope you've all heard me. And I should stop repeating myself and get to my essay. All right, so given that, I'm supposed to be nonpartisan. People have asked me, why don't you just help the Trump campaign, or why don't you just help RFK Jr.? Why don't you just denounce, like endorse someone and denounce other people? And I just can't, because I'm CEO of a company called Daily Clout, which means I'm not supposed to be partisan. It's a company that lets everyone engage with legislation. I'm not supposed to be partisan. I can't endorse. However, as I always say, my allegiance is to the Constitution, not to any candidate or political party. However, it is clear to me that these are not normal times, and that the Biden-Harris administration, and now the prospect of a Harris-Waltz regime, is so un-American, so not democratic, so dangerous. It's clear that a coup has been staged, and they're preparing to stage an even more entrenched coup in November by stealing the vote in many ways, and or creating a state of emergency that allows them to tamper with absentee ballots, deter people from showing up in person to vote, all of these things I've been warning you about, all of which are coming true. So as a result of that, I have to kind of break my own neutrality a bit. And I've been trying to, give general campaign advice to the opposition campaigns, whether it's RFK Jr. or President Trump's campaign. But I specifically had a critique, I hope a constructive one, for President Trump's campaign, because I'm very, very worried about it. Because if President Trump and RFK Jr. don't in some way merge into an effective movement by November, it's the end. It's the end of this country, and we are all going to quarantine camps are worse. I mean, look how quickly the UK is devolving into straight up fascism, within a matter of weeks. It's like all out, you can get arrested for putting your opinion on social media. And it's happened in Australia. It's happened to Canada. Nothing will prevent the globalists from doing that to us if we don't have Trump and RFK Jr. being very successful in their respective campaigns, and again, ideally joining forces in some way close to November. That is it's like a miracle that we have that one shot to stop this globalist machine. So as a result of the dangers represented by a Harris-Walz ticket, I'm going ahead and giving free advice, free campaign advice. So I'm going to read you this essay, and then I'm going to take your questions. It's very concrete. How Not to Run Against Vice President Harris. And the subtitle is A Former Democratic Political Consultant Offers Urgent Free Advice. All hell is breaking loose. The Dow Jones tanked 1,000 points by 2.15%, and the Japanese stock market is down by 12%. Markets globally are shuddering. The southern border is open. This is after Vice President Harris went to the nations south of the border to get at the root causes of illegal immigration. And 18 to 30 million people of fighting and reproductive ages who have no vetting at all, including hundreds of whom have proven ties to terrorist groups or nations, have poured into the U.S. American men and women struggling to pay out of control grocery and gas prices are beginning to understand that these newcomers receive free luxury housing, free transportation, free food, and in some cases, room service. Crime is rampant in cities. Concerns about crime have grown by double digits under the Biden administration, according to the Pew Center for Research. Quote, a growing share of Americans say reducing crime should be top priority for the president and Congress to address this year. Around 6 in 10 U.S. adults, 58%, hold that view today, up from 47% at the beginning of Joe Biden's presidency in 2021. Homelessness haunts our nation's alleys and parks. We were humiliated by the Biden administration in withdrawing from Afghanistan in a way that traumatized many veterans. And now we are humiliated with the politically motivated reaching of a plea deal with 9/11 mastermind Khalid Mohammed. In the past 3.5 weeks, President Biden has been exposed as being severely demented. My interview with Dr. Kelly Victory revealed that he is likely to have had Parkinson's since early 2020, which means that Vice President Harris has been committing treason for years by covering up his condition. The Secret Service was revealed as being either hapless or wicked, to the point that a president was almost assassinated. No one at the top of our nation's leadership showed up to welcome Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And Vice President Harris did not seem to know what to say when she was confronted by press, while the principal, meaning President Biden, wandered off to board an empty plane. This all played normally. Even the former president surviving a would-be deadly attack would all be greatly beneficial to the Trump campaign and to the RFK Jr. campaign. Every single one of these issues and moments is a gift, indeed, to the two opposition campaigns. When President Biden stepped aside from campaigning, the RNC should have seen a straight shot to victory. Just a little discipline and a little focus, and President Trump would be reelected in a landslide too big to allow for the margin of certain cheating. RFK Jr. would do well enough to join forces with him in a major cabinet role and then be well positioned to be president in 2028. And yet, in just the 2 weeks since this huge opportunity to defeat a lethal globalist regime opened up, President Trump and the RNC seem determined to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. I am supposed to be nonpartisan because my company, Daily Clout, which empowers citizens with access to legislation, is nonpartisan. However, it is so clear that enemies of our country have seized control of the Biden-Harris administration that I feel I need to speak up to help any candidate, President Trump and or RFK Jr., who can unseat these traitors. To that end, here are some cliff notes from a former Democratic political consultant to two presidential campaigns, one of which succeeded and one of which won the popular vote, about how not to run against Vice President Harris. Know the electoral math is number one. Every single presidential campaign in modern history has to factor the same math equation in order to attain victory. This math also has some profound philosophical implications. The math for left or right does not matter is no one can win by appealing just to the base. I cannot say this enough. No matter how effective left or right are at turning out their shock troops, the grassroots believers on either political extreme, no one can win by appealing just to the base. There are simply not enough of these true believer voters in the key swing states that ultimately matter. A swing state is a state that can go either way. You can have millions of passionate MAGA voters activated and turning out to vote in Alabama and South Dakota, and ultimately it won't matter in attaining victory for President Trump. The same is true of activating the base in just New York or California for Vice President Harris. The way our electoral map is set up, any candidate needs the swing voters in Arizona, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Georgia, the current swing states. So the US presidential election always comes down to pathetically few swing states, like thousands or sometimes even hundreds of votes in those swing states. In 5 to 7 states, the margin of victory is agonizingly narrow, and Trump's and Harris's only route to victory is to swing undecided voters in those states his or her way. Swing voters tend to be moderate. What does this mean? To me, this fact creates a beautiful requirement. This math requires a successful presidential candidate to speak not just to people who agree with him or her, but also to use compassion and insight and imagination to speak to all of America about the issues that unite most Americans and that are of concern to most Americans. Now, given human nature, it is very difficult to achieve this. That is, to give up feeling the ego gratification of speaking into an approving echo chamber, and rather to choose to use language and identify policies that really unite, really reach out and appeal to those who do not agree with one about everything. When I advised Democrats, I was always warning them, as they have the same human temptation to speak to a cheering echo chamber, about how important it was to respect the fact that, for example, not everyone whose vote Democrats needed supported abortion rights as they themselves did. I would warn Democratic candidates about the tunnel vision that led them to assume that everyone saw identity politics or welfare or the environment or feminism and gender roles or religion or guns or the military the way that they did. When President Clinton spoke to liberals in liberals-only tones, he lost support. But when he had a conservative leaning advisor such as Dick Morris, he was able to speak in a more universal voice about issues that united people across the political spectrum. He focused on the economy and dramatically slashed welfare entitlements. He signed a welfare to work bill. That gesture sent an effective message. This was not a lockstep liberal pandering only to the base. Both President Ronald Reagan before him and President George Bush after also perfected this dance step. And this quality in their platforms and rhetoric was crucial to the victories of both men. President Reagan had brilliant speechwriter Peggy Noonan. In her soaring words in President Reagan's speeches, you will never find an us versus them dichotomy or see evidence of a narrow conservative tunnel vision or of any pandering to the base. Noonan had the gift of speaking to all of America as if it was one community, which indeed we are at our best. and of appealing to the most inclusive aspirational instincts in our common American nature. Because of this unifying aspirational language in President Reagan's speeches, you also won't find gay baiting, intrusive attacks on opponents' private lives, personal slurs, nasty jokes, or racial pandering. Ronald Reagan's willingness to speak across party lines dates back at least to his speech at the Republican National Convention in 1964, one which launched him as a candidate himself. And I quote from that famous speech, A Time for Choosing. It's a long quote, so I'll refer you to the essay itself if you want to see it, but it's just very nonpartisan, very uniting language. George Bush Jr. also had a talented muse helping him in his messaging. This was Karen Hughes, Director of Communications and counselor to the president. She crafted not only Bush Jr.'s message, but also many of his policies, such that message and platform seamlessly aligned. She is the most under-recognized political and message genius in modern American history. I hope someday I can tell her this myself. And I can say from personal experience, having served on the opposing Gore 2000 team, that due mostly to her talents, it was very difficult and finally impossible to beat her. The reason it was difficult is that she was herself the voter that both sides needed in order to win, a moderate suburban white woman, socially inclusive and fiscally conservative. So George Bush Jr. was saved by Karen Hughes from falling into the enduring stereotype of the rich, callous, kind of sexist, kind of racist, older white man narcissist that had bedeviled conservative male politicians up to that point. In Karen Hughes' speeches for President Bush Jr., you also find unifying language, uplifting storytelling, moderate positions, and you will not find gay bashing, personal attacks, intrusive scrutiny of people's private lives, or race baiting. Hughes likely coined the excellent phrase to deal with the eternal conflict over abortion rights, which interestingly I could no longer find online, was something like good people disagree on the issue. The shining middle was her middle name. And then I quote from Karen Hughes in 2015, also very uniting and aspirational. You can only win by appealing past the issues on which your base agrees and reaching out to champion issues and use language that will unite everyone. 2, don't slur millions of voters. In just 2 weeks, the Trump-Vance team has managed to offend millions of potential swing voters by not engaging in quote-unquote message discipline, that demanding form of service to the country in which you don't just blurt out whatever is on your mind, but you actually stay rigorously within the parameters of saying what you actually should say. People on social media are haranguing me for insisting on the importance of message discipline, but I will not stop using my own voice to remind the opposition candidates how urgently important it is. It is not self-censorship to be on message. It shows maturity, self-control, and even self-sacrifice. It is a form of putting the ego aside in service to the community, even the nation. I raise all of this because when President Trump attacks Vice President Harris for identifying as Jamaican as well as Indian, as he did in speaking with the National Association of Black Journalists, he is taking a swipe that may play well with his base, but that also may well horrify the 33.8 million multiracial voters in the United States. It took me aback as the wife of a man who has one grandfather from Africa and another from Ireland. And why? There was no good reason. When J.D. Vance attacks, quote, childless cat ladies, and yes, I know it's an old clip, but that's what opposition research is. It recycles old clips. You can expect it'll reappear. That may well play well with his base, but it will appall the 43.5 million single women in the United States, a demographic growing over time and exactly the demographic that Trump and Vance require in order to win. By dismissing childless women, cats or no cats, Vance was insulting a majority of American women younger than 30 and a third of women 30 to 34, 1 in 5 women 35 to 39, and so on. Millions and millions and millions of women who vote. And I show in the essay charts showing these millions and millions and millions of American women actually going up over time. When conservative commentators dug in, trying to help Vance by talking about how having kids changed your perspective, which is no doubt true, they were ignoring the fact that childlessness is growing and that 1 in 6 Americans over 55, or 15.2 million, has no kids. Instead of simply dropping it and pivoting, I can't say this enough, a move that in media training is called hit, bridge, sparkle, Vance is compounding the mistake by talking about it. 2 weeks in, his wife is talking about it on NPR. I can promise you, if you even mention Childless Cat Ladies to NPR, that will be the headline, as it is. The phrase, of course, because the DNC is on their game, spawned countless t-shirts, refrigerator magnets, stickers, and memes, instantly creating a hip, defiant community out of a prized voting demographic. And then I share all of these like stickers and posters of childless cat ladies. So JD Vance, Mrs. Vance, no, don't fall into the trap. For God's sake, drop it. Say, quote, I don't always express myself perfectly. What's really important is to leave the country we knew intact for all the children, and then move on to economy, crime, border, unity. These questions are just set as traps in order to generate that bad headline. And Republicans, for reasons that mystify me, step into them again and again and again. These missteps went on and on. J.D. Vance said at a Michigan rally, quote, Kamala Harris said something to the effect that I have no loyalty to this country. Well, I don't know, Kamala. I served in the United States Marine Corps and built a business. What the hell have you done other than collect the check? Mr. Vance added. No and no. By addressing the first female and biracial vice president of the country as Kamala, J.D. Vance is already showing tremendous disrespect. You don't have to like the woman to respect the office. And this first name basis dismissal feels insulting to any woman or person of color who has ever been talked down to by a white man. The obliviousness of the Trump-Vance team about the nuances related to being white men in a multiracial two-gender world, that is, how to not offend heedlessly or needlessly, is pretty stunning at times. Imagine Vice President Harris addressing J.D. Vance as, well, I don't know, J.D. It would be breathtakingly insulting. By asking a woman of color, quote, what have you ever done but collect a check, end quote, Vance invokes welfare queen stereotypes, intentionally or not, but consultants are there to save candidates from unintended horrors. By asking a government employee, what have you ever done but collect a check, he also may insult the 2 million voters employed by the federal government and the 19.23 million voters of local employees of local governments. These include cops, firefighters, teachers in public schools, many nurses, all of our military, and so on. He may not like what Vice President Harris has done in office, but to suggest that the former Attorney General of California and then the first woman vice president has done nothing just evokes every male boss who ignored every woman's achievements and then sent her out to get coffee. Better to attack Vice President Harris by title on her achievements: an open border, a crashing economy, war overseas, skyrocketing crime, and the criminal cover-up of a demented president. 3, stay away from personal attacks. Lastly, there are the personal attacks. These always read as a sign of weakness and should be delegated to surrogates. Vice President Harris caught her union members in Detroit, Michigan. She sounded credible. I don't like her, but she sounded credible at that event. Meanwhile, President Trump astonishingly made at a Mar-a-Lago press conference, insinuating comments about a conversation he had with Willie Brown, Vice President Harris's former lover. President Trump claimed Brown, quote, said terrible things about her, end quote. This nasty, vague swipe, which referenced a sexist trope well known in conservative circles, the suggestion that VP Harris, quote, slept her way to the top, end quote, looked terrible for President Trump. 2 adulterous men telling nasty stories about someone who had, during her time with Mr. Brown, been a much younger, sexually active single woman. All of it looked and sounded like a time capsule of nasty old guy gossip and unpleasant patriarchy. I am being ratioed on X for pointing this out, but sorry, I am not sorry. Better to course correct 80 days out and 2 points up than with a week left in November and 10 points down. And I know this part of my critique offended a lot of Trump supporters. I'm sorry. I am really trying to be helpful here. Not everybody sees your candidate the way that you do. The people you need to have vote for him if you are to win with a large enough margin to outdo the planned cheating, don't like this kind of thing. Okay. I'm telling you, I'm a crossover. I know how they hear this, how I hear it, right? And why say it? Why go there? Border, crime, economy, unity. Border, crime, economy, unity. That is all you need to do to win. 5, go back to conservative first principles. Probably that should be 4. I understand that many conservatives feel strongly about trans issues and about men in dresses and about gay porn in schools. These are all valid issues to discuss, though I think that many conservatives these days are careless in not separating out adult consensual gay relationships, for instance, which were never targeted by conservatives such as President Reagan or George Bush Jr., and the criminal grooming of children or pedophilia, which statistically, by the way, is a crime more often committed by heterosexual men targeting girls. But as strongly as you may care about men and women's sports or about trans issues or the ill-defined gender ideology, those are issues that right now affect a tiny minority of people. They are not the issues with which most voters are struggling every day. Those core issues are crime, border, and economy. Without more careful language, Republicans risk alienating the 7.1% of Americans who are lesbian, gay, or even transgender, but who also may be religious or fiscally conservative or pro-life or liberty-oriented. And I show a chart showing that people who identify as LGBT are actually also going up over time. If contemporary Republicans did not seem at times so fixated on what other consenting adults did in the privacy of their homes, millions of these LGBT Americans might gladly vote Republican. Many swing voters support many conservative planks, but are very wary of how the conservative movement has seemed increasingly censorious since the Reagan and Bush Jr. years about consenting adults' personal lives, and they fear America becoming a version of Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale. So given that, go back to conservative first principles, which used to be more inclusive: crime, border, economy, unity, freedom, constitution. The same theme that a successful presidential campaign is not a mirror reflection should be applied to religious preferences as well. Don't get mad at me yet. Hear me out, please. I know many conservatives feel that they want a Christian America. I respect their deep faith. But the founders guaranteed freedom of conscience as the bedrock of our nation, and they insisted on having no established religion. A Christian state can be as tyrannical as an atheist one. See the Inquisition. And Christians, much as I respect them, do not own the idea of America or of God. America is also Jewish, Hindu, Muslim, Buddhist, and atheist. What I'm trying to say here again is that a successful presidential campaign cannot be a dream wish list with all of your favorite items on it. A winning presidential campaign also cannot be a therapy session. You won't get everything you personally want or like if you are going to actually win. To win a presidential campaign, whether you're on the right or the left, you cannot have all your personal preferences expressed. You can't have all your dreams come true. To actually win, you cannot campaign on everything you want. 5, use surrogates. At this point, I'm looking around for President Trump's or RFK Jr.'s surrogates. Where are they? Surrogates are campaign shorthand for people from all walks of life who go out to rallies or onto the airwaves or online and support their candidate, using the candidate's talking points and making them their own. These can be actors, musicians, influencers, business leaders, ordinary people. Remember Joe the plumber? But they all get a script and talking points. The campaign is supposed to manage them, and out they should go. I see Megan Thee Stallion twerking away for Vice President Harris. I don't like it, but I see it. It's there. I see actors and tech bros and other elected officials speaking up for Harris Waltz. I see the UAW all getting in line to express their support for Harris Waltz and to promote their campaigns. There's Vice President Harris in Navy, looking both slightly worried and unwell and also somewhat presidential. The stagecraft is solid. Where are President Trump's surrogates? Laura Loomer asked on X why the Trump campaign is pushing away people who want to help. Where are all the conservative commentators' talking points? You may not think it's original or authentic to use talking points and surrogates, but a successful presidential campaign sends daily talking points to sympathetic news outlets and to thousands of surrogates so that everyone is on message with the quote message of the day. This messaging shifts according to news events, focus group reactions, and polling. Where, oh, where is this effort on behalf of MAGA? The DNC predictably lined up their surrogate effort aggressively because their candidate is, well, just not very likable. So if you surround her with likable supporters, people can hold their noses and vote for her when they are alone in the voting booth. To many millions of voters, believe it or not, conservatives, President Trump's policies are great, but they don't find the man himself very likable. He too urgently needs likable, admirable, diverse groups of people, country singers, athletes, entrepreneurs, tech guys, homemakers, teachers, cops, religious leaders, to stand up for him and to repeat his message. This effort is so absent on the part of the RNC that it almost feels as if they do not want President Trump to win. 6, last one, I promise, have a clear message in one place. My last point is the most important. Craft a clear message and put it in one place that is easy to find. A classic presidential campaign boils down to a slogan or mission statement. Quote, change versus more of the same. Quote, don't change horses in midstream. Quote, hope and change. Quote, or further back, where's the beef? Are you better off today than you were 4 years ago? It's the economy, stupid. For this campaign, if I were consulting, which I'm not, I'd propose 2. MAGA is for everyone and bring back good times. That's it. Simple. Repeat and repeat. Building out from this core DNA of the message should be a clear, succinct platform. Where is President Trump's platform? And don't refer me to a website. The platform should be 5 or 6 commitments and no more than 10 that are easily accessible and that everyone will know by heart by November because they will be constantly repeated. I had a delightful conversation with Dr. Peter Navarro about President Trump's campaign, but my heart sank a bit when he told me that the campaign had released a book, The New MAGA Deal, The Unofficial Deplorables Guide to Donald Trump's 2024 Policy Platform, with, quote, 100 actions in 100 days. I mean, you should get it. You should order it. It's important. But that effort is much better than no visible platform at all, and I applaud Dr. Navarro for putting it together. However, respectfully, if this is the main guide to the platform, it is way too much for anyone to summarize or quickly to check. I had the same difficulty early on finding or hearing RFK Jr.'s platform succinctly. His summaries have improved. If you search Donald Trump 2024 platform, a lot of nonsense and legacy media comment comes up on the critical first results page. The closest thing to a platform easily found is, quote, 2024 Republican Party platform, end quote, on the website of something called the American Presidency Project. It does not even say clearly that it is President Trump's platform. It's 20 items, too many. 10 of them are just great. I'd keep and them everywhere. Some are hard for non-MAGA media consumers to understand. Quote, end the weaponization of government against the American people, end quote. Some are marginal or vague. What is, quote, radical gender ideology, end quote. I kind of know because I watch MAGA media, but most of Americans won't know. And some items are vague, bring the US, quote, record levels of success. And here there's this list of 20 items. And I won't read all of them. You should take a look. But number 1 is seal the border and stop the migrant invasion. Number 2 is carry out the largest deportation operation in American history. Number 3 is end inflation and make America affordable again. Number 4 is make America the dominant energy producer in the world by far. I would cut all these extra words. 5 is stop outsourcing. turn us into a manufacturing superpower. 6, large tax cuts for workers and no tax on tips. That's a good one. 7, defend our Constitution, our Bill of Rights, our fundamental freedoms, including freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and the right to keep and bear arms. 7. No, that's 7. 8, prevent World War III, restore peace in Europe and in the Middle East, build a great Iron Dome missile defense shield over our entire country, all made in America. So by now you're probably glazing over because it's too long. Some of these are great. Rebuild our cities, fabulous. Some are, I would say, marginal. Keep men out of women's sports, fine. But is that in your top 6 or 7? Deport pro-Hamas radicals, make our college campuses safe and patriotic again. Problematic. What does that mean? They're using their First Amendment rights. Secure our elections. Awesome. You want that down for number 19? Unite our country. Sure, but what does that mean? So very much needs a red pencil. This platform needs to be shortened, taken out of all caps, please, repeated everywhere, and communicated in sound bites. Every speech should have 5 or 6 memorable sound bites that advance the message and the platform. All surrogates should be given, as noted above, talking points that advance the message and the platform. And that is it. And then you stay disciplined and on message, deviating not to the left nor to the right till election day. And you clean up the voting process as much as possible. Emerald Robinson asks why anyone should think 2024 won't be a repeat of 2020, given that the electronic voting issues and absentee ballot issues have not been resolved. She's right. I have been appalled that almost no Republican lawmakers, except for 2 in Wyoming, including State Senator Tim Salazar and Representative Heidi Sampson in Maine, have tried to pass our excellent election integrity bill, a bill we offered the whole country in draft form to anyone, with our lobbying for it for free. The other hundreds of Republican state senators and representatives did not pass or even introduce our free, excellent bill. Do Republicans want to lose? Do they want to keep losing? This passivity, forgive me, is astonishing me. I hear a lot of Republican commentators these days complaining. They complain to me on interviews and on podcasts about how unfair the legacy media is and how stupid the media coverage is and about how the DNC lies and on and on. All of that is true. I know very well the DNC mafia. I know well the DNC lies. I worked for them, but I also have little patience for all of this whining. And it makes me miss Steve Bannon, imprisoned as we see now for good reason, as he was the general of the Liberty effort. As he would have said, no whining. Of course, legacy media blacks you out. You have a massive independent media universe where the right is making almost no effort to elect their own candidate. Of course, the DNC lies and is cynically on the offense, paying off influencers. I could have told you in my sleep their every move in advance. This is the playbook. How can you complain about this if you can't stay on message for 48 hours? Why be your own worst enemy? Of course, coverage is stupid. If you show some message discipline and get lots of surrogates, you don't need to rely on getting past the stupidities of the coverage because you will be reaching the voters yourselves directly. I love MAGA. I love MAGA in many ways. I think only the joint forces of Trump and RFK Jr. can save this country, as I said earlier, and thus can begin to save the world from murderous globalism. So much is at stake. It's so easy to do the right things. So why not do them? This is an opportunity for MAGA and Republican supporters of President Trump and RFK Jr. supporters too separately, and someday I hope together, to transcend their private wish lists and their personal echo chambers and to truly unite and heal the country. It takes some maturity. It takes some discipline. Will you do it? Will you save us? Or will you rather choose to fall prey to frat boy jokes, to all or nothing wish lists, to judgmental sectarianism, to insider nudges, and to snarky gossip, and thus lose it all? So that is my StreamYard reading of my essay. And now let me take some questions. Kim H says Uniparty does not want him. J.W. Delahunt says, I know it's pathetic, sick of all the weak Republicans. Shona Partridge says, Republican passivity. So true. I'm across the pond and am horrified. And let me just stress, I'm not trying to be mean to Republicans. I'm not. I am trying to be useful. I'm trying to help. Okay. Montana Gal says, look no further than Chris La Chivita, am I pronouncing that correctly? Susie Wiles and Jason Miller. They're sabotaging Trump's campaign. Not too late to fire them all. Bannon could have stepped in. That's why he's in jail. Look to the loyalists. Loomer, for one. That's really interesting. Why would they do that? James Cracker, it's a very good point. Where are Trump's surrogates, right? Karen Carpenter, you make so many excellent recommendations. I hope Mr. Trump listens to you. Thank you. Pete Blowers says, where is Steve Bannon? I know where he is, but Trump needs him desperately to stay focused. Too much noise and not enough signal. That's well put, Pete Blowers. He's in jail, and there are restrictions on even how easily he can follow events online. There are restrictions on how easily he can receive and send emails. So that was for sure deliberate, because we would be in a very different situation if Steve Bannon were not in prison, really unable to communicate with the world freely. Oh, wow. DZM says, Chris La Chivita, tell me if I'm pronouncing that right, who is his campaign manager, wanted to try him for treason in 2021. That's extraordinary. Kim H says, I do think your intentions are pure and the people attacking you are being impulsive and not thoughtful. What you're saying is true. That's really sweet. Thank you. But I don't just I want to have an honest conversation. I appreciate your kind words, but I also, want to just thank you. But I don't need you to make me feel better. What I really want to do is save this country, but thank you. Okay, Sandy Child says, why are you on my page? Vote for Harris Waltz. I heard via Naomi Klein you were off the deep end and she hated that she got confused with you. Well, Sandy Childs, thank you for bringing this up. There's a wonderful thing on Facebook where you can block someone that you don't want to hear from. So I encourage you to block me, and thanks for your input. Naomi Klein her family receives millions of dollars. Her family's organizations, I should say, and her family members also receive total millions and millions of dollars from the pharma industry. So that may give you some clue as to why she, at the height of her career, would spend 2 years writing a book trying to portray me as a lunatic, when I have overseen the Pfizer Documents War Room Daily Clout team, whose findings about the greatest crime against humanity in recorded history have driven down the value of Pfizer and Moderna stock to 2016 levels. Let's see. Stephen K. Bannon ran the 2016 campaign. Trump needs him now. Whomever is in control stinks, says Jay Hecker. Slay, says Yadu 2016. You are so right, Queen. That's really funny. Thank you. Roscoe sings. Hi, Roscoe. I think this is my old friend Roscoe. I agree Karen Hughes is very talented and all, but your guy won. She just had a client that was willing to fight. That's totally true, Roscoe. It was heartbreaking. And it turns out if Gore had counted all the votes in Florida instead of selective ones, he would have won. So you're right. He should have fought. And this is where campaigning is so effective, because I remember vividly the Republicans, the RNC, was starting to say sore loserman. Remember that? Instead of Gore Lieberman, sore loserman, sore loserman. And it was so emotionally traumatic to the Gore campaign that, they reacted by not fighting, and they should have fought. They should have fought all the way, everywhere, every level, with the media, with the Supreme Court. I totally agree with you. I mean, he won the popular vote, and he could have won the electoral vote if they had, counted everything. It's heartbreaking. You seem to promote RFK who has no path to victory, says Ann Vance. Well, let me be super clear, guys. I am not supposed to endorse anybody. I'm supposed to be nonpartisan. You can go to Daily Clout, take a look. We offer legislative feeds where you can change bills and see bills and lobby for bills yourselves. And as a result, I really have to be nonpartisan. I take that very seriously. So I'm not endorsing RFK Jr. I'm not endorsing Trump. But as I said in the introduction to this talk, you may have missed it. It's so obvious to me as a student of history that a coup has taken place in this country. We don't even know if our president is alive or sentient, right? This is a riff I spelled out before I began reading my essay, that I do feel it is incumbent upon me to help any opposition movement to get our country back, our constitutional republic back. And I think that's legitimate. I don't think that's partisan. Rowan Wood says, Naomi, can you bring this up on War Room? I can, but let me tell you why I want this to be kind of my last video about this. Let me try to explain how this works. Once the campaign has decided on a strategy, they shouldn't be talking about it in public. And I can't advise the campaign. As I mentioned, they haven't asked me to, and I'm not. And so as a result, I've had to present my advice publicly. But if anyone were to take my advice, right, they shouldn't say that they're taking specific advice. Do you see what I mean? Like whether it's RFK Jr.'s team or Trump's team or whoever, they shouldn't talk about their strategy. And this is a mistake that campaigns make over and over. Democrats have made it, but the Bush team was more disciplined. They didn't talk about their strategy. And our team was always leaking about our brilliant strategy, which is so dumb. Like it's like telling the other side in a football game how you're going to play, the next quarter of the football game. So I don't want to keep advising publicly, right? I'll write a Substack essay from time to time, but really this is the basic. You don't need to have my ongoing advice about this in order to be successful, whether you're RFK Jr. or President Trump, because the rules are so simple for a successful campaign. And I laid them out here, right? This is kind of the best of everything I know from my, years around the White House as a spouse and my couple of years involved in 2 different presidential campaigns. I can give you details, but I don't think it's a good idea for me to be publicly continuing to comment, because then the other side may see what my comments are and adjust accordingly. I don't think I'm not being a megalomaniac. I don't think I'm that important, but any smart DNC operative is going to be watching influencers trying to sway, the opponent's campaign one way or another, and doing more than that, trying to eavesdrop in restaurants, trying to bug their rooms, as we've seen, right? Trying to hack their emails. I feel kind of bad about doing this essay today because the poor Trump campaign was hacked. Politico did a story saying that the Trump campaign spokesperson, whose name I didn't even know, right? That's how hard it is to follow the Trump campaign, said that a foreign entity, a hostile entity, hacked them, which is, if that's true, it's going to be a mess, because there's going to be a drip, drip, drip of emails right up until November, right? A nightmare. But all of this should be happening with discretion. If you want to win, you keep your cards close to the vest. You don't share your strategy. So that's why I wanted to do this and answer all of your questions, so that I could stop commenting publicly and give my best guidance and put it out there. It's quite easy. It's quite basic. As you see, if you do these things, you will win. It's pretty easy to win a presidential campaign or anything. I just want to say, for those who wonder if what I've read to you is really valuable, I kind of want to direct you to my career, right? Not to blow my own horn, but I've been canceled again and again and again and again. And I reach about 2 million people a month on all of my platforms combined now. And, the US government tried to cancel me. The White House tried to cancel me. Twitter canceled me. YouTube canceled me. Every major news outlet tried to say that I was a lunatic. A distinguished intellectual, Naomi Klein, wrote a whole book trying to say I was a lunatic. I've managed to fight off, to survive and have my voice continue to be heard because I use this methodology, right? If you think, those of you who follow me, think about how I handle debates. I'm not blowing my own horn. I was just very well trained by a genius media trainer at the start of my career. And also I learned a lot advising 2 presidential campaigns and being the wife of a White House speechwriter. So, think about how I talk, right? I'm talking to people across the political spectrum about very difficult issues. Think about that, I use this discipline that I'm telling other people to use myself every day, and it's very hard. It's not easy. I try not to name call. I try to take the high road. I try to think, what will unite this conversation? How can we find a point of communication, right? What language am I unconsciously using that shows my biases? Let me examine my biases. I do that all day, every day. I try to be succinct. I try to get to the point. I try to not engage in nasty gossip. It is a discipline. I am a human being. I just want to be a bitch like everyone else, really do, or just talk to people who agree with me. Pardon my language. But I know how damaging that is if you give in to that, right? And how it then becomes about you instead of about the issue. And the secret to my being in the public eye for, what am I, like 40 years, in spite of the greatest forces on earth trying to silence me, is that I practice what I preach in this essay. So think about it, right? And who else did? Like the great public figures did exactly what I'm telling you to do in this essay. I'm actually giving you the most important teaching of my whole career right now. But I've studied rhetoric, and I taught rhetoric as a professor. Martin Luther King, this is the kind of language he used. You will never find a nasty swipe in his speeches or public presentations. You'll never find divisive language. You'll never find us versus them. He had plenty to say about us versus them. He lived in a, Jim Crow society, but he was always speaking to the hopeful possibility of a future in which we could be brothers and sisters. Tremendous discipline. And it got him killed because that's much more powerful than, but he changed America, right? He changed the world. That is much more powerful over time than, nasty swipes or partisanship or, speaking only to his community or speaking only to people who agreed with him. He spoke to people who hated him, right? He included in his message people who wanted him dead. Same thing with President Lincoln. His great speeches, they are uniting. They are calling on what he called the better angels of our nature. The great orators, RFK Jr., I'm not supposed to endorse, I'm not endorsing, but he's doing a very good job. The DNC wants to squash him metaphorically like a bug. They don't give him Secret Service protection. It's shocking given his family history, right? And even now, I guess they finally did after this assassination attempt against President Trump, but, he could so easily devolve into hostility and attacks against the DNC and attacks against Democrats and attacks against the people who are attacking him or belittling him, constant, brutalizing of his reputation. And he stays on message. Too prolix, he talks too much, but he stays on message, on message, on message. And his message, he's survived some of the most powerful people in the country trying to silence him. I think because when people really hear him, they're hearing a uniting, healing, substance-oriented message. All right. Let's see. Roscoe Singh says, Aristotle and Dante, read that book. Christians tried to pull that from libraries. Read it, totally benign. Movie is good too. RFK Jr. all the way. Not going to be gay baited. Okay, I'm not sure exactly what you're talking about, but thank you. Let me make sure I'm answering X questions as well. because I promised you that I would. And here I am, and where are the X questions? Let's see. I don't see them. Maybe they're all coming right onto StreamYard. Okay, I'm learning this technology. I watched the swing state voting being shut down in November 2020. So who gave that order? Something to be addressed urgently. Shona Partridge. That's very big news. What state were you in, Shona? That's very important. Well, all of you can and should go to Daily Clout and download the election integrity bill, which is pinned right there on the homepage, and send it to your elected officials at the state level and also at the national level, and ask them to pass it, because it solves all of these problems. And by the way, our remedies are now in this, as you heard, in this 20-point agenda. Same day voting, paper ballots, get rid of the machines, voter ID needed, no non-citizen voting, no ballot harvesting, eyewitnessed or witnessed and signed absentee ballots, and so on. But, as I said in my essay, literally 3 Republicans, and no Democrats, of course, but 3 Republicans at the state level out of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds tried to pass our bill. And it solves the problem, right? So what is that? What is that about? Why? So easy to do. Why? Why are they not solving the problem by passing a turnkey, excellent, clear language, 19-page bill that would get rid of voting problems that bedeviled the 2020 election? It's shocking. JD needs more appropriate language for sure, says Shannon Moon. Oh, so many great comments. Shannon Moon says, I am a crossover too, and bashing people's personal choices is not going to go well. Focus more on the economy and the border. Of course, I agree with you. Megan is lying. Okay, that's confusing. Jamcracker says, thanks for sharing your observations and experience, Naomi. I appreciate you. I hope the Trump campaign hears and listens to you. Well, I hope everyone hears and listens to me. I want my country back. I also don't want to go into the gulag. This economy is ridiculous, says Shannon Moon. I totally agree with you. A lot of people are on our side now. Welcome, says J.W. Delahunt. Thank you. And let's see, I should just zip to the end. Have you sent this essay to the Trump campaign? Well, again, I'm kind of not allowed to, because I am nonpartisan, so I shouldn't be advising directly, but anyone else can send it to them. You all can send it to them. Oh, Daisy M. Naomi is genius, folks. Heed her words. Thank you. And let's end with this. Miss Lou too says, Naomi, you are smart and correct. How to make it clear in simple terms. It's a choice between freedom and, I'd like to say, slavery. Considering the CCP connections of Harris Waltz, GOP so weak they are afraid, lazy, and feckless, as Bannon says. And then what does he say? It ends there. How tantalizing. Naomi, you are the voice of reasoning and make clear arguments that are very easy for low propensity voters to understand, says Lily Cakes. Thank you. I wish I could hear the end of that earlier comment. Logic, common sense, both rare, says Miss Lou too. Okay, well, there are a bunch of wonderful comments. Sadly, I don't have time to read anymore because my wonderful family, we're visiting my wonderful stepson. So thank you for this broadcast. It has helped me understand your perspective and common ground much better, says someone whose name just skipped up there, Martin Truther. Thank you. Well, I hope so. I mean, I just wanted to always be accountable to you and answer your questions. And I know there were a lot of questions about all of this. So I'm going to stop there. I do want to remind everyone that we do have a sponsor. We have wonderful sponsors, but the one I'm always intending to tell you about who make these broadcasts possible is Native Path. And I swear by their collagen product because I have a mobility issue sometimes. And when I take their collagen, I scamper around like a mountain goat. It really makes a huge difference. And so I want to tell everyone about it. And you can go to getnativepath.com, promo code DailyClout for 45% off. I wouldn't talk about it all the time if I wasn't such a true believer. So they are our sponsor. It takes a lot to produce and distribute these videos, these essays. This will be edited and promoted on social media, and made as easy to follow, easy to share as possible, and that takes resources. So go to dailyclout.io and donate or become a member, please. It really helps us. We really need it. Or go to my Substack Outspoken, donate or become a member. If you can't, because the economy is terrible and so many people are broke, you can help a lot by spreading the word, sharing the information, talking about it, standing tall, and doing everything you can do, which is a huge amount. We're all so powerful together to save our beautiful, beautiful country. So God bless you all and have a wonderful night. Thanks for letting me hop on and share my heart with you all. Bye-bye.